Okay, thank you everyone for joining us here today. Thank you to the Sydney and Melbourne Microsoft 365 business user groups that we facilitate, and a number of people from the Swoop community, the Microsoft community. We're really excited to present this webinar, which will be revealing the insights from the Swoop Analytics Microsoft Teams benchmarking report, which is has just been released. We'll give you a QR code at the end, and our topic really is how to become a team awesome. We've got an amazing group of speakers, but before we get underway, I just want to acknowledge that we are doing this obviously virtually, so we've got people from presenting from Melbourne, Sydney, and also we have Matt, our producer, in Perth. So we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where our speakers are presenting from, and also you're attending. In Sydney here, it's the Gadigal people. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this session is being hosted, and the traditional custodians of the land where our participants are located. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present and future. Thank you. So we have a very packed agenda today, and it's so packed for the first hour that we're actually going to say, do put some questions if you want as you go in the chat, and we'll try and get to them. But we will have a separate Teams interactive meeting at the end, which we'll give you the link, and you can join if you'd like to talk to some of our amazing speakers. We will go through some of the insights from the report. We will actually see some of the top performing teams as Swoop has analysed through 100,000, I think, teams that they've looked at, and we'll give you some tips and tricks on how to be a super team and a super performer on Teams. We'll introduce people as we go, but I have to say we have some of my favourite experts online today, from both the Swoop fraternity, from Engage Squared, and also from Microsoft and Cricket Australia. So welcome everyone, and I think we're really looking forward to hearing your insights. So to kick off, we'd like to ask if I could ask Genevieve to give us some insights from Microsoft about what was an emerging platform a few years ago to now is something that involves us all, and is obviously very significant from a Microsoft point of view. Thanks, Genevieve.
Sweet. Thank you, Mark, and thank you so much to the team for having me, and hello to all of those joining us online virtually today. As Mark mentioned, the team has prepared a jam-packed webinar for everyone today, absolutely full of great findings, so it'll definitely be an hour well spent together. So I guess if I just jump straight into it, this benchmarking report that Swoop has been releasing yearly is a massive piece of work. And it's really a huge testament to the efforts of the Swoop team. You know, a lot of data has been crunched and released to the world, basically for free. And even though I should know a whole lot about Microsoft Teams, because that's all I work on day in and day out, I still found myself learning so many new things from this report, and I'm sure you'll also find the same when you get around to reading it. So I think the big standout with the findings this year is that there's really no denying the big impact that COVID-19 has had on the way that we now work. And I'm sure by now you're all very familiar with the, I guess, maybe buzzword or buzz phrases, you know, shift to remote work, increased digital transformation, teamwork, collaboration. Those are the really big ones. And these concepts became top of mind because the traditional workplace simply couldn't exist anymore amidst the pandemic that's going on. So suddenly we had to find ways to keep our teams connected, even while they worked virtually and apart. And that, of course, saw a huge uptake in collaboration platforms like Teams. So with everyone rushing to transition to this new normal and just working to kind of get everything set up and running digitally and virtually, it almost comes as no surprise that a huge chunk of organizations who now had to make this shift just aren't maximizing their use of the Teams platform. So then this leads us to the question of, are we actually making the most out of Teams, and how do we even start to do that? And this is really where Swoop's analysis really shines a light on. Anyone can use Teams for its basic functions, you know, the chat, the calling, the meetings, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. To get to the valuable and meaningful interactions, to get to being more productive in the flow of your work, you have to go beyond using Teams as a telephony tool. And when you make that shift, you get to the really exciting stuff. And that's all the stuff that I'm working in on my role right now. So things like extensibility, which is all about integrating apps and workflows into your everyday to help you be more productive, to help you manage your projects in one place, and so forth. But another area is effective teaming, which the Swoop report really delves into. And I'm sure the team will delve into it later in this webinar. So the questions of, how do great teams collaborate? What does great even look like? And what better way to learn from these benchmarked organizations and top performing teams who've already gone through the journey? So I guess speaking more from the Microsoft end on what's coming and our vision, the exciting stuff that's happening, that's always coming out of the woodwork, it was always going to go beyond the telephony functions. So Teams was never meant to be just a communication tool, because a lot of that already exists with all our competitors and so forth. So we wanted to always create a single hub for teamwork where you start and where you end your day. So you're seeing a shift in focus towards making Teams more extensible and customizable so that developers and partners and customers and just everyday users can start building apps and integrating their workflows and processes directly into Teams. And something that came out recently to help teams work more effectively together is being able to extend meetings. So now you can build and use collaborative apps across the full life cycle of a meeting. So, pre-meeting, during the meeting, post-meeting, you can now use apps to help in that flow of the meeting. So that's just a few exciting things that I guess Teams is coming out with. And I guess that's probably enough talking from me also. I'll hand it back now to the team to really get into what you're all here for, which are the insights.
Thanks, Genevieve. That's awesome, and sounds like you have a really interesting job at Microsoft. So we appreciate you joining us. So I'll now hand over to Dr. Laurie Lockley, who is amazing one of the founders of Swoop, and I know has done fantastic sessions with us over the years on both Teams and Yammer, and his insights are also always very good. So tell us, Laurie, what have you got from this year's report that you can share with us? You might have to come off mute, Laurie.
Thanks, Mark. So we like to refer to our studies as the world's largest studies, but it's more related to the way that we do our studies. So typically when people do studies like this, they're survey-based. That's not how Swoop does our benchmarking. We actually look at every digital interaction that our benchmarking partners have made during the period that we looked at. We looked at a 3-month period during COVID up to the end of February. And, we discovered something like nearly 100,000 teams over the 33 organisations that agreed to participate. All the data is anonymous, so we don't see people's names. We don't even see the team's names or anything like that. We just see IDs and so forth. So just to put this in context, when Gallup runs its world poll, if you like, worldwide poll, they take input from something like 200,000 people. We took input from 320,000 people. So if you like, it is a very big study. We look very much in depth at what people are actually doing. We don't have anything against surveys, but we think that you really need this total complementary view to understand the real truth of what's actually going on. So let's move into some of the insights that we found. Okay, so the first one is maybe not unexpected, and then when we were forced into lockdown, people went directly into the sort of what were formerly the Skype functions of calls, chats and meetings. Probably what did surprise us a bit was the extent of that. So the 3-month period we looked at, for the larger organisations, probably around 90% of the people didn't actually move beyond that function. They were basically using the telephony functions. Now, Genevieve spoke about the richness of Teams. Well, in essence, only about 10% of the people were actually looking at that part. So that surprised us a bit. So if we look at the overall number of messages, 28 times as many chat messages as channel messages, that gives you a bit of a picture of what that was sort of looking like. Now, that sort of is an issue, I think, moving forward. We did do some surveying in our study, and we did see that people were getting ready to move beyond telephony now, which is good news. But remember, if you stay in the telephony, you're not actually making use of the richness of Teams as a hub. You're not actually sharing documents. You're not operating as digital teams. You're not actually adding other apps into your workspace. You're just doing what you would have done before with Skype, for example. So we think that's a real opportunity that I think companies are getting ready for that now, which is quite good. The other thing that we were told was that chat they were saying that their email, a lot of our case study participants were saying that the email level, the internal email in particular, was actually going down, right? So, and they're assuming that was being because we're doing more chatting and we're doing more channel messaging. Unfortunately, the reason why people don't really like email is because it's often one-on-one. It's sort of a lot of things aren't being shared in email, but if we're replacing that with one-on-one chat, we haven't really actually improved the situation, have we? So what we found was that, whilst in chat you can have multi-person chat, only about 2% of all chats were actually multi-person. So most of the chat was one-on-one, so if you look at that situation, that can be very dangerous, if you like. So in our sample, I guess we had 7 consulting companies who were acting as subject matter experts, but they're also acting as subjects. And when we look at their data, they weren't working in chat, they were working in the channel. So the unequivocal advice was that don't work in chat, right? So this is something that's coming out. Don't work in chat, do your work in the channels, because you get the full richness of Teams when you're doing that. So that's just a bit of a warning about, it's nice to see the email levels go down, but don't replace them with something that's actually worse. Now, finally, on the general insights, of course, we would expect that the activity levels in Teams will go up during COVID. And of course, we saw that, so what we see what we've seen reported in the press repeatedly is that people are just dying of this digital overload, right? We're just being killed by overload. What we found was that actually wasn't the case. Right? So when you look at everybody that's operating, we see this long tail effect that we see in the digital world, that it's really only the top 5–10% that are actually really sort of using it heavily. The other 90% are really quite comfortable, so we turn that up, and in fact we have a section on stress and workplace stress, and we talk about challenge stress and chronic stress. I think you'll enjoy reading that part, because that talks about how people are, if they're really stressed or not, and we find that they're actually more challenged than stressed. So let's just move on to some specific Teams insights. So it's not that people didn't try and use the Teams, right? With 100,000, we found 100,000 Teams, if you like, that have been created through those 33 organisations. But we only found that we found that in that period of 3 months, only about 26% actually had any activity in that time. So like 70% weren't actually even active in the 3-month period we looked at. They were still there, but they weren't active. Then we looked at that 26%, we found that only, I think it was like 3% of all the teams, were actually meaningfully active. And when we say meaningfully, we set the filter at, they had to have at least 3 people active, and they had to do at least 1 interaction a working day. So that's not a very high filter. And we found that took us way back to only 3% of those, less than 3% of those 100,000 teams. But nevertheless, that was still a big number of teams, nearly 3,000 teams. We analysed those in more detail. Now, again, to put this in context, organisations that have done this passive monitoring, people like Google published a big study a few years ago about doing this sort of passive analysis of their teams. They used 180 teams, right? So we still looked at nearly 3,000 teams. And then we picked out the top 10% of those, was actually 273,000 teams. And these are the ones that we wanted to look at in detail. And then we looked at the organisations that had those teams in there, and we went actually to them and we asked them, could we talk to some of their high-performing teams that we'd identified? Now, remember, for us, it's anonymous, right? So we don't know their names or anything like that. They often didn't even know who they were. They could see who they were, and they would say, some of the bigger organisations would say, well, yeah, well, we don't actually know about that team, but we can contact them for you, and let's see if we can organise a meeting with them. And thankfully, we're able to do that. So 12 of the organisations, or 12 of the teams, are featured in the report. So Sharon has put together, I think it's over 30 pages of case studies of these teams, really high performing, really inspirational. When you look at them, you know, they're doing things that you just couldn't have done in an office environment. And what was pleasing to me is that we've been working on these ranking algorithms that we've drawn decades of research into, and then customized our measures of what good looks like in teams. And it was pleasing to me to be able to say, well, when we picked these teams up, they were actually very transformational. The algorithm was doing the right thing. It was picking out good teams, and I think you'll enjoy reading their stories. I guess the final point is that last year, when we first built our algorithms, we found that only about 20% of people were working in the same way that the researchers were telling us high-performing teams should be acting. And that's really self-directed, operational, interacting, cohesive, all of those sorts of things, agile, all the things that we hear about in the press. These teams were doing that, right? So last year, about 20% of the teams we found were working that way. This year, with a much bigger sample, we're looking at about 40%, right? So we're moving in the right direction. Digital teams are becoming self-directed. They're doing the right things. And I'd expect as we go forward, we'll see more and more and more of that. So, I mean, we're fortunate today to have two of those super teams here to talk to you. So what I'd like to do now is just pass over to Emily, who's our customer service director in the APAC region, to present one of the sought after Swoop collaboration awards to these super teams. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Laurie. Now this is actually quite interesting, because I think off the top of my head, this is probably one of the first times for us at Swoop we've actually conducted a virtual awards presentation. I actually have the physical awards here with me today, so they're ready to pop into the post and to go out to our award winners. Now, firstly, I would like to take the opportunity to congratulate, we have Cricket Australia, who have won one of our awards. So I wasn't lying when I said I had the awards here with me. So of course, Cricket Australia and their tech leadership team were actually identified as one of the top performers as a part of our benchmarking study. We'll get to listen to Emma from Cricket Australia in just a moment. And the second award that I'm giving out today is actually to Engage Squared and their Team Awesome. And we're going to hear from Ruby in just a moment as well. And while I'm here as well presenting some of these real awards that I have sitting here, I also just wanted to give a quick shout out to some of the other organisations who won Swoop of High Performing Team Awards. Those organisations include Chaucer, Humana, Talk Social to Me, Real Foundations, Carpool, Griffith University, Orange Trail, Regione Emilia Romagna, and New Zealand Post. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Sharon so we can learn a little bit more from Team Awesome from Engage Squared.
Thanks so much, Emily, and congratulations to Emma from Cricket Australia and Ruby, who's going to speak on behalf of Team Awesome from Engage Squared. So as Laurie said, as part of the benchmarking, we analysed almost 100,000 teams, and in that we could identify the top performing teams. But for us, we can only see the team ID numbers. So what we had to do was go back to each organisation and say, these were your team IDs, can you tell us about the team? And you know, we've got the data, but all of you that are a part of this webinar, you're the ones with the stories, and that's what we want to tap into. And I think by identifying these high-performing teams, we can all learn some tips that will help us in our business as well. So when we found out from Engage Squared that their top team was called Team Awesome, I definitely wanted to find out more about Team Awesome. And we've got Ruby joining us today. Thank you for joining us, Ruby. Can you, we'll just start. The thing that I found was really interesting. So overall, you guys were number 15 out of the 100,000 on Laurie's analysis. And the thing that really stood out to me, Ruby, was that you've never met face-to-face. Can you tell me about Team Awesome and what's your secret to being such a high-performing team?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So my name's Ruby. I'm part of Team Awesome. We are a team of project managers at Engage Squared, which is a Microsoft 365 consultancy, and we're located in multiple offices up and down the country. As project managers at Engage Squared, we manage various Microsoft 365 implementations, change and adoption projects, and we've been working here since March 2019. So I'm super excited to hear that we were one of the top 15 performing teams out of the 100,000 analysed by Laurie and his team. So yeah, thank you very much for having us. Yeah, it's funny because we still haven't met face to face. We did have a all company event back in April, but unfortunately I was somewhere between Perth and Darwin on a road trip. So there's a couple of people in the team that I still haven't met. And in addition to that, we're not actually even really, it's probably worth noting, a team that does work together day to day as other teams might. We're project managers, so we only work on you know, our projects with our project teams, and there's only ever one project manager on each team. So it's amazing that we've been able to come up with these numbers, and it really is testament to the team and how, you know, how hard we've all worked at investing in our team and communicating with each other.
Oh, great. So I, when I wrote the case study that's in the benchmarking report, Ruby, I actually spoke with Elaine, who's the head of the PMO office at Engage Squared, and David. And one of the things that really interested me, that stood out, is you've got this virtual digital team, and they kept referring to the trust that you have amongst your team members. Can you tell me, how do you build trust when you've never met face to face? A lot of your your meetings actually aren't video meetings. It's actually just done in channels, but you're working really productively and somehow building this trust. How do you do that?
Yeah, so we actually were originally all in Melbourne when COVID hit. There was sort of 3 of us in the Melbourne office, and so we'd had the chance to build that relationship and build that trust. But yeah, as COVID hit, we actually hired a couple of additional members in Brisbane and Sydney. So they were onboarded digitally, as well as having to, you know, start working digitally as well. But yeah, so as I said, as a PM team, we weren't sort of used to building or maintaining a purely digital relationship with one another. It was very much a start from scratch sort of challenge. Obviously, building trust is always hard, but you know, it doesn't happen overnight. But pretty proud of how far the team have come, especially with the pandemic hitting at that time as well. So I think we built trust within the team in sort of 2 ways. One, I think we created a super safe digital space, and that was very much a focus from the top down, from management, as well as individuals sort of bringing that focus in. The safe digital space, you know, we were able to consider our wellness, to work out loud, and obviously just collaborate day to day, working through issues, etc. And the second way as well, which I think is super important, that we all built in sort of that level of accountability in the framework in which we work together. So we really did invest in our team's governance, and I think that investment really paid off in terms of being able to communicate reliably with one another. That communication worked both ways, was consistent, and I think it really did create that sort of social capital that we were able to enabled us to function as a successful team. So we were able to sort of not just use the technology and get the business value from it, but we were also able to quickly solve problems, and that was often with the help of one another. So yeah, it helped us not to do our jobs just as effectively, but build and maintain relationships with one another, which was super important.
So Ruby, when you're talking about the governance there, did you guys get together as a team and go through literally, this is what our team is going to look like, this is how we're going to use channels, this is where we're going to share files? I mean, was it down to that sort of granular process of really making sure everybody knew how to work in this team?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have obviously our team meetings anyway, regular team meetings, project forums, and when the pandemic hit and we did go to remote working, we did all get together and say, right, we've got these new people, one in Brisbane, one in Sydney, 3 in Melbourne, and not just our own team. We manage really diverse project teams day to day as well. We've even got a couple of the office in Perth, and then we've got our Melbourne office as well. And so we thought about how we were going to start using Teams for ourselves and obviously for our larger teams. And we've been using Teams for the last year or two pretty well anyway. So we had a good base to work from, great lessons learned, and some real, we talk to our customers every day about Teams governance. So we had all of the tools and all the materials we needed. So yes, we did get together and we said, right, these are our regular touch points. These are our channels where we do X, Y, Z. This is where we do issue resolution. This is where we're going to keep our risk register, etc. And then on the flip side, with our wider teams, it was a dedicated team to each project, and we would then add the relevant channels particular to that project, whether it was the project management one or deliverables, or whatever it might be, change requests coming through. So very much formed in that way, and obviously the communication on top of that. So we're all going to be now back-to-back meetings where we're trying to get in people's calendars, and can't do that sort of water cooler chat anymore and walk over to people. So if something needs to be addressed by you, just make sure you're mentioning people. If you're needing decisions quickly, nice in the channel so everybody else can see, we can track decisions, etc. So yeah, just sort of the basics that we nailed pretty early on, I think definitely led to the success that the team saw.
And another thing I think you guys did was just wellness check-ins when everybody was working from home, so no one had that social interaction with their colleagues. You were just doing something as simple as that would have, I assume, been over a video meeting, and you just did a check-in to see how everyone was going. Yeah, so it was a bit of both. So when the analysis was run, as I said, the 6 of us in the team still hadn't met face to face, and that must have been talking on behalf of the team that joined then, but super hard to come in and try and build a relationship from scratch and work digitally as well. So it was not just important for the existing team, but those newbies coming in as well. And as I said, a real focused effort by both management and individuals to ensure that there was that continuous communication, and that we were also building and maintaining relationships with our colleagues. So we did this by sort of using video calls, regular check-ins, sort of encouraged to go out for walk and talks and grab a coffee and expense it, which was nice, supporting local business and all that. So yeah, lots of coffees, lots of walks, hugely encouraged by the business. And we actually, even off the back of that, started a fitness initiative where we would log our Ks on our walk and talks through an app, and at the end of the month, if we hit our target, we made a charity donation. So lovely initiatives like that coming through, just to be able to check in, and actually led to us as project managers coming together more often than typically we would. As I said, you sort of work as a bit of a lone wolf on projects. As a project manager, you might be working with 2 or 3 devs that have the opportunity to work together, but as a PM, you're normally the only one on it. So yeah, so it was a great time. We had lots of other initiatives as well, Connect 4, where we would bring in, we would have a Teams meeting, and we'd actually have an activity that week, and we'd
pull in 4 people from different departments, so dev, consultancy, project management and change and adoption. So it wasn't just our PMs, but we were mixing with other, or ensuring that we were mixing with other departments, and you know, we use whiteboard or something like that and have an activity. A bit silly, but it was really, really fun, and you know, helped with that, maintaining relationships cross department as well. But yeah, essentially ensuring the regular touch points for both our own team and the wider company was really a focus for, you know, as I said, not just individuals, but it was great to see management really pushing that as well.
And another thing I know that Engage Squared are really big advocates of is working out loud. And you guys work out loud as a team, right, in your channel, so it's transparent for everybody in the team, no matter where you are geographically located. You can always get together and keep on top of what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, a bit of a sign of the time, but it definitely pushed us in the right direction. So we're actually wanting to work out loud, I think, more than usual. When you're not able to communicate face to face in the office, you know, it makes you feel like you've got colleagues again. So being able to use Teams in a variety of ways, you know, was great. So we've obviously got chat. And, you know, to Laurie's point as well, those one-on-one chats aren't necessarily conducive to working out loud. So we did have our chats, but we had said from the beginning, you know, any sort of work-related content, let's be putting it in the channels so that we can track it, other PMs can see, and, you know, take advice from that as well. So that would go over into the relevant team and channel. I use the PM team myself, you know, we use the PM team for anything relevant to my team, from, you know, anything from process to ideation to holiday cover, so that the whole team has visibility. And we also have our project meetings in those dedicated channels as well. So you're able to share the agenda for that meeting, any sort of talking points as well throughout the meeting. And you know, as project managers, love those follow-up tasks and actions. So that really does help us deal with any issues that arise. I mean, resourcing, I think it's been mentioned quite a few times at the case study and things like that. It's probably one of the main issues that we as project managers deal with. So, you know, if I need a dev, but they're on David's project for the next few weeks, it's really easy for us to have those conversations, because one, we've built that trusted relationship in Teams, but also enables me to get a fast response. You know, it's a great way to keep other relevant colleagues in the loop, the PMO function in general. We've got a resourcing manager as well. So, you know, by simply mentioning them, you're reducing the sort of effort usually required to go and update every single person. And then I suppose talking more broadly, so outside of our PM team, we obviously have the team for each project as well that we work on. So we share risks, key decisions, budget updates, obviously pulling in planner. Again, love tracking in those tracking those tasks as a project manager. So you know, we're really able to sort of chat and talk through every dimension of a project, you know, all the way through to finishing a project, having a customer survey. We've got a flow in the back end that pushes the customer survey from a form into the team, and we can all see it as a project team, or actually as a company, and be commenting on it and taking next steps from that. So super broad in terms of the reach that these teams have across not just, you know, our own teams, but the wider teams. And then an additional layer to that is bringing actually external clients in, or external guests. We have Microsoft in there, we have individual clients as well, or vice versa. Sometimes we're in their team, which obviously enables us to bring them in on the conversations we're having, and sharing that documentation. So massively reducing, I can totally see a difference from last year to this year, or sorry, the year before, you know, reducing that double handling of information, which saves so much time my side. And also, you know, has the added benefit.
I'd love to hear more about the. Oh, sorry, I think it might be my end or your end breaking up just a little bit, but I'd love, Ruby, to hear more about the external teams. So we are going to have another chat straight after this meeting, with a regular Teams meeting, where anyone could hit you up with some more questions about that, if that's okay.
Perfect.
So keep your questions in mind. But the next organisation we're going to talk to needs no introduction in Australia, and I think you're going to be amazed at how Cricket Australia is using Teams to connect not just the business and the admin side of the organisation, but also the players and the coaches, like those we see on the field. We've got a great story from Emma about how they're all using Teams day to day. Emma, even at the moment, you guys have been thrown, Emma's in Victoria and Cricket Australia headquarters are in Victoria, you've been thrown back into lockdown. So last year you had everything, well actually, why don't we start with how the players and coaches were using Teams last year? And I know, you know, the agility of having to try to put this all back into place again right now during another lockdown.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one, and it's one that you know, last year was definitely something that, you know, we didn't expect, and we didn't know really how we were going to manage, you know, such a physical sport and where you need to be coached and trained, and to then find ourselves here again, you know, today and back in lockdown in Melbourne, but then all the other states all over the place. So last year, what we found was, again, it's the winter for us. Usually the players are overseas playing, and we know very clearly right now, it's in the media that the players have all just come back into the country for us. But it is their core training season where they are focused on preparing for our cricket summer. So when we went into lockdown, while we are elite sport and there is a level of exemption for lockdown, that is only where it's not possible to do things remotely. And so as an organisation, we really do try and abide by the rules, and we, you know, try and lead by example. So where we possibly could, we did have to do things remotely and online. And what we did find was some of the teams were running their training sessions, whether that was, and particularly because of limitations with how many people you could have around you, whether it was a 1.5 metre distancing or capacity in a room, all of those limitations come into play no matter what and no matter where you are. So we found that teams were doing recordings of their training sessions. It was loading into Stream, which was a tab within their Microsoft Teams site, and off the back of that, they had a Microsoft form that they had to complete, which was then to critique their own session. And then the coach, who may have been remote, for example, at the moment, you know, you've got Justin Langer based in Perth, and players that reside in Victoria or Sydney and whatever else in border closures, they would also critique it. So all of our, you know, spin bowling coaches or our batting coaches, they would be able to go in and fill out this form and critique it, but they were having the conversation within the Microsoft team. So, and where it needed to be face-to-face, they were running the virtual meetings like we're doing now, and, you know, what we'll do straight off the back of this, where they've got video on and they're having those conversations, or they're saying, this is what you need to change, and putting it on video, which is really interesting to see how that comes to life in a virtual world. Is it ideal? No, it's not perfect, but I think it shows that you don't need to stop what you're doing. You don't need to stop your training and the likes just because, you know, borders are closed or you can't be face-to-face anymore. You can keep going. And so we faced that last year, and I think, you know, it will be really interesting to see where we get to. Where Melbourne, we're in at least a 2-week lockdown, as it was extended yesterday, and we're going to have to make changes to the way that they had planned the next 2 weeks of training. We're preparing for a big Ashes year where perfect, you know, West Indies and the likes coming. So we have to really keep up to speed and you know, keep adapting to that. So as we go into lockdown again, these types of tools and functionality that we had in Microsoft Teams are going to come back to life. So I'm really keen to see how it goes, but I know that they're already on the phones and already on video calls trying to make this work as best as possible, and only limiting the face-to-face contact if it's absolutely necessary. And that's, you know, we're in a very different world where it's too much of a risk to our players. If we can do it virtually, we absolutely will.
And I love everything that Genevieve spoke about earlier, and Laurie mentioned too, using Teams as the hub. You were just talking about quite a lot of different apps that you're using, but it's all coming from Teams, which I guess even for the players, they can have that on their mobile devices and things like that, so easily accessible, that type of
exactly.
thing.
And we like our players we hire them to play, right? We don't hire them to know the test. We don't give them laptops. They don't need all of this additional things. So for them to just be able to have an app on their mobile phone, just like they would with any other social media or whatever it is, and be able to do a recording and upload it and make that really simple and easy, or join meetings really easy. That's a key for us, is making sure that it's as simple as possible, because we don't want to overcomplicate this. We want to achieve the goal, which is them to do their training and get the information that they need.
Yeah, and another thing that just as you were talking there made me think is, by having all those videos and all that critiquing going on from, other coaches, that if it was a real life training session, you actually wouldn't have all of, all that input from so many other coaches. But it's also a way, I guess, to track progression of training as well. So it'd be interesting in a few years' time, wouldn't it, to go back and have a look at some of those videos now.
It's a really good point, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you've got a batting issue, you'll be able to kind of go back in a year or two and go, wow, I can so see now why it wasn't working the way that I hoped. So it's all data, it's all knowledge collection, but they don't even know it. They're there to play, and that's what the aim is and why we do it.
Yeah, I love it. So Emma, can we go right back to the beginning of the team's journey at Cricket Australia? Because I know when I've spoken to you previously, with all the different state organisations and the national body, pretty much everybody used to be on a different platform, and the only way you could connect was to fly and get together physically.
Yeah, definitely. So the way that the states and territories work alongside Cricket Australia is actually they're all their own legal entities. We all have an overarching, but they kind of stand alone, and we collaborate very well. So years ago it was, I think we had one state on Lotus Notes and the rest on their own environments, and it wasn't efficient, let's be honest. Anyone that knows what it's like when everyone's in different environments, it makes it really hard. And when we start to think about this whole one strategy, and we're all here to deliver cricket and to do it right from grassroots cricket right up to the elite sport, we needed a consistency, because states and territories are responsible for the grassroots and they are responsible for their state land. And then, we've got a responsibility with the elite. So it has to develop and grow together, that it made sense for us to all be on the same platforms and the same environment. So the first thing was to get us all into Microsoft and then into Office 365. And again, Cricket Australia has the overarching of that technology, and we support the states with that. And then out came Microsoft Teams, and you're going to test my memory, but I believe it was 2017, early 2017, we went into the preview of Microsoft Teams, particularly the tech team. We embraced that really quickly and started to really test out. We knew immediately that it was just going to drive our organisation like we didn't see the future before that. So Teams was rolled out and within tech, and we very quickly started going, this needs to go faster. We need to get other teams into this. We need to get cross-state and territories into this, because that was our challenge. Our challenge was either a whole heap of emails that were going back and forth, or it was flying around the country every second week, because you needed to collaborate with the states and territories. So we very quickly started to spin up what we would have classified as trial team sites, and once the word of mouth got out there, it kept growing. So as quickly as Microsoft took it out of preview mode, we basically rolled it out and allowed people to access it. And it's now our core. It is as somebody said earlier, it's the start and end of your day. It is absolutely what we drive to. Email still has its place, but internal communications particularly, and by internal I mean all Australian cricket, so all states and territories and the likes. Teams is where we go. We have Teams meetings, we have Teams sites whether they're project sites or they're working groups or they're department sites. We add in all of those additional apps, whether it's, again, Planner, Forms, Stream. We have flows that run into Teams, all of that behind the scenes. We've got a lot more that we can be doing, and we're really excited to see what more we can be doing, but it is the absolute core to how we collaborate now. And as we're in a COVID world, nobody's getting on flights anytime soon. Yeah. Definitely not into Melbourne and not out of Melbourne. So, we're still operating, and we could deliver the biggest season that we've ever delivered last year, and we've only got a bigger season coming in a remote world. And it just proves that technology is there to support the people, and it really does work if you embrace it to its full ability.
So Emma, just tell me please about the Sydney test that was on in January, just after Sydney's Northern Beaches went into lockdown. And I think it all fits into what you were just saying about this communication that you have across all the organisations, because suddenly you couldn't fly in people from interstate to help with a huge test, which I think we still had 30,000 attendees.
Yeah, so what has happened, like if you have a look at the way our season worked, we kind of went into hubs in, as you know, most sports and the likes did for the start of the season. And then as we started, as we say, reducing restrictions, a lot of people came back to Melbourne for the Boxing Day test, and Sydney very quick after the Boxing Day test. And so a whole heap of the Melbourne people were still in Melbourne, and we weren't expecting to have hubs up in Sydney. Our head office is in Melbourne, and we've got a small office in Brisbane for Cricket Australia, but we've got the states and territories. So Cricket New South Wales is in Sydney. And usually, generally speaking, they're not fully responsible for the Boxing Day test. It's an elite sport, it's national, so it's a Cricket Australia thing. So this time round, with all of the Northern Beaches going into lockdown, as well as, you know, it being very hard to fly around, and we weren't in the hubs in Melbourne at that point in time, we couldn't fly the regular amount of team up to Sydney at such a last minute, because we continued to hold it in Sydney. So what we had to do is we had to call out to Cricket New South Wales and anybody that happened to be in Sydney at the time that was in a cricket world, and see how they could come together and support us delivering that. And what that meant was the regular people who may have been stuck in Melbourne could jump on Teams and be a part of the Teams sites that we had, which would help give that handover and that briefing and the constant updates for what would have normally been part of their role to deliver. They could give it to somebody who was, say, from Cricket New South Wales, who was on the ground trying to fulfil a role that they hadn't really done before. And it really meant that, you know, things from instant video messaging, you know, to going, where do I put this, how do I do it, and jumping on a video call, to instant chats, as well as document shares and the likes, was all put into Teams very, very quickly to be able to deliver that test with not having the regular people that we would. And I think, you know, the stuff that we pulled together just shows how diverse they are, and how we've got so many more resources available to us because we've got platforms to help communicate that really quickly.
Absolutely amazing. Emma, your team, your personal team was one of the top performing teams. It was called the Tech Leadership Team, I believe. We won't have a time right now to go into how that team operates, but we can do that afterwards in our chat. But I also wanted to just show for everybody who's part of this webinar, show you what it looks like on Swoop, so we know how we can pinpoint what these high performing teams are. What measures can we look at to know that this is teams, you know, creating some business value? So can I hand over to, you're kind enough to share your technology leadership team on the dashboard, and I'm going to hand over to Emily O'Brien, who's Swoop's Director for Success in the APAC region. Emily, can you just walk us through what measures should we be looking at to know that you know, we're on the right track for a high performing team?
Excellent. Thanks, Sharon. And thank you so much, Emma, for sharing. So yes, we're going to see how a high performing team really comes to life by looking at the dashboard here in Swoop. So if we scroll down just a little bit, the first thing that I want to call out is the Swoop team persona. Now, as a part of this year's report, as we've mentioned earlier on, we found that there's a distinct movement towards self-directed teams this year, and it certainly looks like Cricket Australia's tech leadership team is seeing the benefits of this reciprocated connection happening within the team. It's also quite nicely backed up by what you can see in the network map as well. So it's pretty clear who's in the team and who's contributing. And there's also some, you know, shared accountability and interdependency happening. And I think that also comes back as well to team size, which we also talk about in the report. I think for this team, we've got about 8 members, which I would say is definitely the optimum size that we talk about all the time. So up to 10 users. And this also makes it really easy for leadership to move around depending on the context of the conversations happening as well. As we move a little bit further down, and just to quickly call out two-way relationships. So this is looking at the level of cohesion that we're seeing in the team. We would say hitting a target of around 85% is a really, really strong result. So for this particular team, only just sitting shy at 83%, really great result. The response rate, which should be maybe a little bit further down as well. The goal here would be to leave, ideally you would want to have no posts that are going unanswered, but for the tech leadership team, we do have some, there are some unanswered posts, but I think there's also that level of acknowledgement happening as well through liking, working alongside the reply rate. Also the key player dependency. Now, for this particular team, it's really, really impressive, and it's sitting at, if we scroll down a little bit more, I think it's sitting at 0%. Now, you can't get better than that when it comes to key player dependency. This just means that the spread of interactions and the spread of conversation is very even across all users in the team. And the last part that I want to call out is the team channel activity there as well. So as a part of the Cricket Australia story in the report, we talk a lot about having clearly defined channels. It's one of those really actionable tips. And then there's also a section in the report that I recommend you check out, which is about setting targets and setting goals for your teams as well. So we found that 9 channels is kind of a nice sweet spot to be sitting, and more is definitely not always better when it comes to number of channels. So that's kind of a very, very quick rundown of what this looks like in Swoop. And thank you so much, Emma, for sharing. Sharon, did you have anything else to add here?
Well, how about I hope people can join us for this meeting afterwards, and that'll give everyone the opportunity to ask Emma questions, because I know I've got lots more questions for Emma as well. But right, as part of the benchmarking report, as well as sharing the case studies, we also wanted to share advice from the experts. So when you're launching teams, or when you're in the, you want to kickstart your teams network in your organisation. So we went to our partners and got their top tips. So now we're joined by Claudia Piscitelli from Engage Squared. And Claudia, you're the head of change and adoption at Engage Squared. So Claudia's put together 3 of her top tips for lasting teams adoption. Claudia, can I hand over to you, and can you talk us through your top tips for a successful teams network, please?
Thanks, Sharon, and I'll make this super quick, but I have 3 tips for you all. So we've obviously heard a lot of amazing stories and amazing insights in terms of what behaviours people are bringing into the platform to be a high-performing team. Well, what does that actually look like in practice? So tip 1 is that you should be aligning the use of Microsoft Teams with your organisation's vision and strategy. So a lot of organisations really quickly implemented Teams last year in response to the pandemic. And that meant that there wasn't really enough time to kind of put together a bit more of a plan, or a structured approach around, well, what's the why? Why are we actually using Teams? But it's not too late to do that. It's really important that you now kind of take that time to pause and actually think about how you're going to position the use of Teams within your organisation. I think a lot of people have realised that there's a lot more that can be done with the platform, but they're not sure how to take it. So if you can help connect those dots for them and get them to see how they can use Teams within the context of their role, and also how that fits alongside other systems and tools that they use every day, that can be really powerful and a great way to drive adoption. Second is making sure people have the right skills and the right tools to facilitate discussions on collaboration. Sharon, the way that you were asking questions before around, well, what conversations did you have around Teams? I think it's really important to give people the tools to have those conversations. It's not often, or really, that if you think about even your own work history, that we kind of think about, well, how are we going to come together as a team and communicate and collaborate with each other? So if you can give people those tools, that's really powerful. The other thing that's really important here is that people have the capability and the confidence and understanding of how to use Teams. if they don't feel confident using the platform, then they won't go there. They'll stick to what they know because Teams feels way too unfamiliar. So it's not going to be a place that they'll naturally go to collaborate and communicate with each other. So really important there that you establish that base of capability with your staff. And last but not least, celebrate success and give credit to people. People love to learn from others. So just like we're doing today and sharing what works and what doesn't work, it's really important that you do that internally within your organisation as well. Show what behaviours work. Ask what etiquette people are using. When are they using app mentions as an example? That's really powerful way to really drive adoption within your organisation as well. Let the success of Teams be shone through the voice of real people in your organisation. I just wanted to quickly wrap up as well to kind of round out these top tips by sharing what this could actually look like in practice. There's a few things that we typically recommend to our clients that we work with on Teams adoption. The first is that you could potentially look at establishing a champions community. So if you have a core project team that's been tasked with launching Microsoft Teams or improving adoption in your organisation, think about who in your organisation could you leverage as an extension of your core team to help influence change among their peers. Second, giving that self-serve training material. So to my second tip earlier around making sure people have the capability, give people some tools. Most of the time, we like having some guardrails or some kind of guidance around what we should be doing in terms of business rules. So a great way to do that is by providing quick reference guides, cheat sheets to Teams owners, to Teams users, as well as to your champions community as well, even giving them, for example, house rules for how they can be collaborating together on Microsoft Teams. And last but not least, this is a bit of a fun one, gamify the change. You'll be amazed at how many people will be on board with something if there's a game involved. And people love free things. So if you can tie that to winning a bit of a prize because they've been a top performing team in your organisation, you'll be surprised to see how much your adoption in the platform really skyrockets. So this is also a really great way to celebrate that success I spoke about earlier by getting people involved in a campaign, getting them actively talking about this is what we're doing and it's working really well for us. So they're my top 3 tips. I'll pass back over to you, Sharon.
Oh, I love them, Claudia. So one of the gaming things we can all take away from this webinar is to be part of next year's Swoop benchmarking report and see if you can get an award like Cricket Australia and Team Awesome from Engage Squared. But as Mark said at the very beginning, we only released this report overnight. So if you use this QR code, it will take you straight to it. It's free to download. There's a lot of information in there, but we'd really encourage you to scan on this, download the report and start your teaming journey. I'm going to hand over to Mark now. Thank you so much to Emma and Ruby and Claudia for sharing all those insights.
Great tips, everyone. I'm just taking a picture of my code to get my report. I've only read little sections, so I'm really looking forward to reading the whole thing. And well done, Laurie, Sharon, and team. I know you've been working very hard over the last few weeks on it, and it's all your benchmarking reports are really insightful. So that's the biggest tip of all, is if you're really wanting to know how to really be high performing as an organisation in Teams, I suggest this is a very good starting point to go to. Look, we're sort of right on time. We are now going to switch over to a regular Teams meeting as opposed to this is Teams Live, which we've been using for our webinar. So when you we'll share the link in the chat if we can, and what we're going to do is go on a normal regular Teams meeting, no muting. You can chat to us. We'll all be chatting because we're all sort of Well, I'm ready for a glass of champagne. It's a bit early in the day, but like I always feel after a webinar, but we're going to have a bit of a debrief. So we'd love a few of you to join us. So please join us now for some questions, and if you'd like to get our contact details for any of the speakers here, this is the opportunity for you to sort of interact with us. I know that Swoop and those of us at Engage, we're happy to help you on your journey, and I know that Cricket Australia Emma's always fantastic, and as an organisation you're very good at sharing things, and obviously Microsoft is here to help us all, isn't that right, Genevieve? So we look forward to seeing you. We will be having something in July. Hopefully we'll be able to do some sort of hybrid. We almost got there today. That's why we had lots of speakers. We were going to have a bit of a hybrid event, but obviously lockdowns prevent us from doing that. That will happen eventually, but we will be having something in July, and Steph, our marketing managers, I know, working hard with Matt Dodd on the next exciting instalment of our webinar series. So if it's all right with now, I'm going to close out, probably leave Matt will be there if anyone's having trouble going over to a regular team meeting now. Goodbye, thanks for joining, and see you at the other side of the Teams bridge.